Hey guys, today we're going to look at mastering in Ableton. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the frequency distribution of our song. We're going to analyze a few different songs by other artists, and then we're going to learn a few things about the frequency distribution of their track. We're going to apply what we learned to a demo song of mine. The important thing to note here is that we're not going to be looking at anything other than frequency distribution, or like compression or overall dynamics or total loudness, but we're going to be fixing the actual tonal balance of our tune. It's a very simple thing, but it's something that I see people not get quite right and then wonder why they're not getting the loudness or the clarity that they want in later parts of the mastering process. It's also important to note that usually if you've got a demo that was as rough as the one that I'm using today, you'd run through this process, you'd analyze what needs to be fixed, and then you'd request that those changes be made at the mix down level rather than we try to remediate them at the mastering level. We're going to hear the difference of a properly balanced tune versus a pretty unbalanced demo version. And the first thing I want to show you is my span preset. So this is the factory one. I've got it monitoring some pink noise. Here's what pink noise in the default span analysis looks like. So you can see that the lows are at -48 here and the highs are at -33. So we've got a gentle upward slope. Pink noise essentially has even power throughout the frequency range. So span by default is set to monitor a little bit brighter than what humans hear. I'm not sure why it's set up like that. What I do is go into the settings through this little cog in the top right and just change the slope to 3, which should flatten that out. And there you go. Now we can see that equal volume bass matches equal volume top end. So that's the first thing that I do. All right, so now that the display matches roughly what we're going to be hearing, I like to add in mid-side monitoring. So currently we're just seeing the mid information. What I like to do is use this drop down and go to mid-side stereo. And then in underlay, and enable the sides. So now you can see we've got the mid information still in the dark green, and we've got side information in the light green or the yellow kind of color. And so when the sides get louder than the mids, it pops up to be a sort of a pinky color. Let's have a quick look. There you go. You can see in these low mids that the sides briefly went higher than the mid channel. All of that gives you a bit more information to work with. So I've saved that as my default preset. So that's just how it loads every time I load span, because it gives me a little bit more information about what's going on, and it also gives me a more representative curve to the frequency display than the default view. So that's my span preset. All right, so I've loaded up a few tracks in Ableton, and it's important to tell you that I can't actually play them because YouTube will hit us for a copyright violation, but we can still analyze them in span and having a look at them. The other important thing to note that we're only looking at this stage at the frequency distribution of sounds. We're not looking at all at the dynamics. So the metering isn't going to show us really how quickly things happen over time. It's just going to show us the presence or absence of frequencies. So it's important that you understand that we're only looking at the frequency domain at the moment. We're not looking at the time domain so much at all, because that's something we're going to either handle in the mixdown or at a different part of the mastering phase. So let's have a look at these 5 different tracks in span and see if we notice any similarities about their frequency distribution. Okay, so I've opened all 5 of the spans and I've hidden the meters and stats because we don't need to look at them right now. And we're looking for similarities on these charts. And I can kind of see some already. The main similarity that I'm looking at here is that overall, the bass is much louder than the top end. And there's kind of a relationship between those. So if we look at the peak of this bass, this line here is at -24 dB, and the peak of the tops is at -36 dB. So that's a 12 dB difference from top of the bass peaks to roughly where the tops are peaking. Let's try this one here. The bass is coming up to about -25 dB, and the tops are around -32, -35. So there's sort of about a 10 dB difference there. On this center one, the bass is peaking at -24-ish, and the tops are coming up not quite as high, but about 38, -38. So that's a relative difference between the highest bass peak and the highest top end peak. And I definitely look for that when I'm looking at a track and I'm referencing it with my track. Say, well, what's the difference in my song between the bass and the top end? Some tracks are mixed so bright that the top end actually peaks at about the same level as the bass, so that's quite rare in the songs that I work on or listen to. If we just finish up rounding out these 5, you can see again there's a nice strong bass peak, and the top end is approximately, somewhere between 6 and 12 dB lower. I have seen on like deeper, darker drum and bass tunes where the top end will be like 18 dB lower than the subs, but that's pretty rare. Oh, by the way, all these are glitch hop tunes, so they might not be relevant reference points for what you're looking at. The important thing is that we're looking at the relative differences in the frequency spectrum across a few different songs to get an idea for what our glitch hop song that we're going to master later should look like. So the other thing to look at is that there's heaps of sub information in the sides, even for 3 out of 5 of these tunes. So this one and this one have been high passed, and so they don't have as much sub information. If you look at these 3, heaps of sub going on, mirroring what's happening in the mid channel. Now, I normally wouldn't do that because I don't think that the sides really benefit from any sub information in them. People will tell you can't hear that sub information. They're kind of wrong, but let's not go into it. You'll definitely notice that it's there, and side information at 150, 200 hertz. Oh yeah, you'll be able to tell that, and to me, it sounds great. But anything kind of below 100, I try to get rid of it unless it's absolutely necessary, which I don't think it is. So it's interesting these tunes have it. These tunes, however, have been high passed, and that's what I would normally do. Get rid of any information that you don't actually need in your final signal. And the other thing is that every single one of these has a nice curve. You can clearly see that they drop down. So this one from somewhere around 12, 13K, they drop down. So this one's been low passed at probably 14K. This one at 14.5, although that looks pretty steep. This one sort of curves downwards from 10K. So I would imagine that sounds quite deep and not as toppy. And this guy has been high passed probably from somewhere around 12K to take out all this extra top information. When I've been mastering tunes in the past, I've noticed that there's just a whole bunch of stuff happening at 18 kilohertz. There's no good reason for that stuff to be there. No one can hear it. It's usually harmonics or noise from some other sound happening somewhere lower in the frequency spectrum. And so as a general best practice, I do roll off the tops from somewhere above most people's hearing range. Most people aren't going to notice, and if you are punching out 100 decibels of 18 kilohertz, you're probably going to be hurting people whether they know they're being hurt or not. So you want to really tame that stuff. Now, the other important thing we're going to check out here is that you can see the snares. Look at the 200 hertz thonk right here. Thonk. Thonk. Yeah, so nice big peaky snare. So usually in most tracks, this one's probably the best example of what I would consider well produced. You can see the sub is happening here. It's reasonably constant. You can see the kicks punching through in this sort of 100-ish hertz range every now and then. When the kick doesn't happen for a little while, you can see the harmonics on the sub pop up. And you see the snare is a little bit louder. So the kick is maybe 6 dB quieter than the snare. The snare's peaking at minus 30. And it's important to note these decibel readings in general, don't pay too much attention to them. I wouldn't advocate that you try and make your sub land at minus 24. Just use relative measurements. So I use the sub as the reference point for how loud all the other elements in my mix are going to be. I'll look at my mix and be like, oh, okay, so the sub hits at minus 30. That means that my kick could hit anywhere from minus 30 down to minus 36, depending on style. Usually when I'm writing a song, I'll keep the sub and the kick at about the same volume level. If I'm not sure about their relationship, or if I think it sounds good, I will just check it once or twice in Span or some other tools just to make sure that it's not actually entirely out of balance. Monitoring bass is one of the hardest things, especially working in a small studio space like I do. You just can't get a representative feel for what's going on. So you do need to use metering to back that up. Anyway, so we've seen the snares, and the last thing that I want to draw your attention to is that every single one of these has a little bit of a smile curve. So it starts up high and it dips through the mids and then it comes back up again. And so you can see here we've got a similar thing going on, although this one's reasonably flat. Like I said before, I think this tune is probably going to sound a little bit dull and dark. You can see a gentle slope. And this one, similar thing, starts off high, curves down and comes back up. The individual harmonics are breaking through that little curve, and that's fine. I mean, that's And that's fine. Those sounds must be pretty necessary. Having individual harmonics of sounds come through is what makes things sound good and interesting. So don't just flatten everything into a smile curve. Overall, there's a general shape across all of these where the bass starts quite high and the mids come down in a dipped, and then we come back up with some percussion. If we look at the top left one for a second, we know this peak is the sub. We know that this thing is the kick. We know this thing's the snare. There's a bit of a gap in here, so other instruments won't really be filling out this 300 to 500 hertz. There'll be different melodic things happening here. You can see all those harmonic peaks, probably a lead sound or maybe a really aggressive bass. Although an aggressive bass at this level would probably just be noise at this frequency range. And then we've got percussion filling out this top end. And so once you get to know the frequency ranges that your sounds sit in, you do get a feel for how loud they need to be relative to each other to make up your desired frequency curve. All right, so that's probably enough of looking at these tracks. But the important thing is they're all pretty similar overall loudness, and they have a fairly similar kind of shape. And you can see that with the exception of these top two, there has been an effort to high pass them and to remove some extra side information, which just isn't necessary. And also you'll notice that the sides are almost as loud as the mids, generally without going over for too often. Okay, so that's having a look at a few tunes in Span. Let's move on. I've loaded in a bounce of an old tune that I wrote. It's roughly in the same style as these other tracks we've been looking at, just so that the reference didn't not match up with the actual track. So this is a glitch up tune that I wrote a couple of years ago. I'll have a quick listen to a bit of it. All right, so you can see, or actually I'll just mute it and we'll leave it playing. So you see already some issues here compared to what we've been looking at all morning. So first of all, our overall loudness is way lower. So, you know, the other tracks, their sub was peaking at -24. Well, we're down at -38. I mean, so there's obviously a lot of room to make this track a bit louder to be more competitive. But the overall shape of the curve is wrong. We've got the sub peaking up here, and then it's pretty much a straight fall off all the way down to the bottom. There's a bit of a bump here at, what, 8 kilohertz? But overall, it's the wrong shape. It's way too subby or bass heavy. There's almost some flatness in this mid-range, and then we just don't have enough top end. And this subby, flabby, kicky area is just way too overpowering. So we could tidy all of that up. Now, I've already covered the shape of this span and how it's not quite right. So let's go through and tidy it up. So today we're just going to use Ableton plugins to try and fix this slope, because this tune can sound a whole lot better with just a few simple tweaks. And normally I'd use a combination of Ableton effects and other plugins like ProQ and Elevate and all the rest of the mastering bundle. Today we're just going to use Ableton stock plugins. They can do a perfectly adequate job. I have been playing songs that I mastered using Ableton tools for years. Don't panic about using them. The first thing we're going to do is look at this adaptive cue section. Adaptive cue, if I drag this bell upwards, you can see it gets narrower. If I turn adaptive cue off, it goes back to being its full width. So adaptive cue changes the cue value based on how deep or sharp the cuts are. There are situations where you want it on, there are situations where you want it off. For us today, because we just want smooth, gentle cuts and boosts, we want it off for sure. Oh, and another thing before we start, if your tune looks like this and you're trying to master it from that point, go back into the mix down and fix the mix. If you've got the option, go back into the mix down, fix the mix, get it looking roughly right in the frequency domain, and then add some pizzazz in the mastering. Don't take a dirty, terrible mix down like this and then try to clean it up in mastering. It's not best practice. It's not always going to work, and you're not going to get the results that you want doing it. We're just doing it today as a demonstration of how far we can take things, you know, how well we can polish this up. So we've got adaptive cue turned off. We're going to use a shelf, and we're just going to cut some lows, and we're going to be quite extreme here. So that's -5 dB. That's quite a lot. And you can see our sub now is up at -42, let's say, and the rest of our track is roughly 12 dB down. So we're already approaching a better position. These tops can definitely come up a little bit. So we're going to use another shelf, and probably from around this region, so 2-3K, we can start to push things. And you notice I'm not even listening to this. This is really bad practice, but we're just going to smooth out the curve and see what it sounds like. So overall, we've got something that looks much more like the tunes that we were looking at earlier. I can already tell the dynamics are not right, but we're not focusing on dynamics today. We've already got some nice top end roll off here. We don't have any flabby subs, so I've already taken care of that. And you can see that there's a little bit of side information. We could address that if we wanted to. Let's just get in there and do it for example purposes. In EQ8, we'll turn adaptive Q off again, and you've got this mode button. We'll switch it to mid side. Currently we're looking at the mids, and we'll look at the sides here. So we can see the same information that Span is showing us represented in EQ8. So I'm going to take a nice steep high pass filter and just bring it up to, you know, a little bit over 200 Hertz. So we get rid of some of that extra 80 Hertz junk that was coming through, which no one's going to notice, and it is going to eat into our overall headroom. So you can see our track's looking a hell of a lot more polished. Let's check out how it sounds with and without those. So I'll turn them off again, and I'll get the track playing. And with our effects back on, oops. Okay, and with our effects back on, so to me, it already sounds a lot nicer, a lot closer to other tunes. Because we haven't been listening to those other songs, our ears probably aren't acclimatized to what sounds right or not. So we're not really doing the best referencing job today because I just can't play those songs. But here's what we've got so far. And without our corrections, these extreme boosts are just too much. You shouldn't be doing these kind of boosts in mastering, but we're doing them today because we're just flattening out the curve and seeing what this song could sound like. You can hear that the snare's a little bit too loud. If I was actually going to be finishing this song up, I would be going in and ducking out a bit of that in the snare, so that 6 to 8K region. We can kind of just duck it on our extreme EQ curve anyway. We might be able to take the subs out a little bit more. All right, and so you see we've got about a 12 dB difference between our subs and our top end, and we've got a nice curve through to the top end there as well. Now in Insight, let's see how we're going for volume. We've actually lowered the volume of our track by about 4 LUFS. So let's bring the gain back up so that we can get a proper representation of what the difference between our two situations is. So that's a pretty drastic improvement just from a couple of EQs. Obviously, these cuts and boosts are just way too much. You should be fixing this in the mix down, but if you just don't have the option, that's one way to go about rebalancing your mix a bit. Normally, if I needed to do something that extreme to someone's mix, I'd advise them on how to fix it in the mix rather than do it for them. Hope that gives you some insight into how to analyze the frequency content of other songs that you like and that you want to sound like, and then how to modify the frequency distribution of your mix downs to get into a similar ballpark in terms of overall tone. Balancing out the frequency distribution of your song is really important for getting the perceived clarity and also for getting the final loudness that you want out of your mix. Now, the important thing is you should be fixing this stuff in the mix. You should be doing some analysis of songs that you like, and then as part of your mixdown process, you can use this extra information to go, oh, I could increase the volume of these things that are in the top of the frequency range, or I could bring down the level of my sub. I find my mixdowns are generally a little bit dull, so I do wind up boosting the highs or cutting the subs on a lot of my mixdowns at mastering. But it's really not best practice. These days I do aim for just having a limiter on the master, and then all of the mix issues are taken care of in the mix. I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope it gets you closer to just having a limiter on your mix bus. So I hope that was useful to you. We went through my Span preset and why it is the way that it is, and we checked out some other tunes in Span to understand their frequency distribution, and then we applied those same kind of rough guidelines to our own tune to see whether it improved the mix at all, which I think it did. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all the likes and subscribes. It means a lot to me. Catch you on the next one.